Not quite sure where to stand here. Is there a microphone here that helps?
It's the mic.
Okay, so I'll stand here.
And you can,
I'll
it'll pick you
as
up.
needed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. You know, I was thinking this morning, normally when I get up here, there's somebody that was so boring in the morning that I'll say, at least I'm better than him. This morning, I don't have a chance. And I'm standing with the speakers. I've learned a ton. So thank you already for a great conference, and thank you for inviting me. I'm from the PSC, and I'm here to help. The Public Service Commission is, you know, we're the ones, the utility regulators. Our mantra is safe and reliable service at just and reasonable rates. And that is a lot of, really, the day-to-day activities of the Public Service Commission is trying to balance the rates that people pay, the cost of services, with reliability. We could build a really, really, really reliable gold-plated system at a cost none of us could afford. We could save a lot of money by not spending money on reliability and having the lights go out all the time. And that's the balance that the Public Service Commission. So I'm going to put that in the context of integrating renewables into the system, because that's the balance that we're trying to afford. We all know renewable resources that offers a ton of benefits. And I'll get into some of those benefits as we go along. But sometimes they come at an upfront cost. How do we manage to weigh those things? But I want to take this a little bit bigger, because in the last 2 years, since this Governor Cuomo's in office, we have had Tropical Storm Lee, Hurricane Irene, or whichever way it blends, Superstorm Sandy. In this area, there was a snowfall where 80 inches of snow fell. I know Central Hudson had some major outages in places they couldn't even get to take care of the outages. That's all happened in the last 2 years. And we keep calling them, you know, the once-in-a-100-year storms. And when you have 5 once-in-a-100-year storms in a year and a half, you start wondering whether that nomenclature still makes sense. And I think it's causing some people to take kind of a fundamental look at the electricity system. When you're out of electricity like they were on Long Island for over 2 weeks, you find out how much we've all come to rely on electricity, and more it's an integral part of our life. It used to be maybe your telephone worked when you didn't have electricity, but now if you've either got a portable phone or you're on any of the other services, without electricity, your phone doesn't work as well. So we're getting more dependent on electricity, certainly not less dependent on electricity. We have built in the state what I call a hub and spoke electricity system. It starts really, really early. I always say the good news is that New York was first in electricity production. The bad news, it means we have the oldest system. When Thomas Edison decided to provide electricity service in New York City, I heard your grandfather worked at the company. When he didn't try to put an electricity plant in each building. He built a power plant and then ran lines to each building. When Niagara Falls decided to provide electricity to Buffalo for the Pan American Exposition, they didn't put a power plant in Buffalo for the Pan American Exposition. They ran transmission lines, the first instance of transmission lines ever being run. Basically, we've been doing that for the last 115 years. And it becomes more and more, bigger. Thousands of megawatts power plants, high voltage, and then we spend the rest of the time stepping it down and getting it to residences, businesses, industrial sites. There were a few industrial sites that started kind of on-site generation, but as utility economies of scale gained momentum, they stopped doing that. One of the only ones that was left was the Eastman Kodak facility in Rochester, where they kept their facility, but unfortunately, Eastman Kodak had problems. And so now they're trying to figure out what to do with that facility. But generally, we've got this hub and spoke system. Now, I tied this to the storms, because when storms hit, and you've got 15,000 miles of transmission and distribution lines crisscrossing the state, under trees fall over, lines come down, and outages happen. And some people are saying, might it make more sense strategically to be looking at distributed generation, microgrids, different view of the world that maybe we need to start thinking about. And I'm going to get back to renewables in a while because I think renewables can be an important component of that new look. Now, it's not cheap, it's not easy, but I know I've talked to some utility executives, I won't quote them by name, but I know even in that staid conservative industry, where they do things their way and like to do it that way forever, they are starting to think about the value of some of these different systems, especially in key locations. You know, I was on Long Island during this past superstorm, and there was a lot of time being spent getting power to hospitals, nursing homes, key places that needed to have that power. So thousands of people didn't get power back as quick as they might have because the crewmen were spending their time trying to re-energize a hospital, re-energize a nursing home, because it was such an essential component. Re-energizing fire departments, city halls, key places. Distributed generation and microgrid really help with that. Now I swear I'll get to renewables, but I just want to put the systems. Some of you people heard me say this. I was at a battery storage conference a couple weeks ago where I did these numbers, but I enjoyed going through this because I think it's telling. We have a peak load in New York State of about 35,000 megawatts. That's the highest we've ever needed. We have to plan for that peak load, and since all power plants don't always run at the same time, there's maintenance, there's outages, we need a reserve margin on top of it. So we maintain 40,000 megawatts of power plant and infrastructure to deliver that 35,000 megawatts at the peak time in New York. 50% of the year, what's our average load? So 40,000 we need. What's our average load? 18,600. So less than half the plants are running on a given day. 95% of the time we're under 25,000. Only 2% of the time are we even within 10% of the peak load. So we are maintaining this incredible system to meet the peak load for 7 hours a year, 5 hours a year, bad year maybe 15 hours a year, that we really need this. And electricity is an instantaneous product, and you're not allowed to have shortages. If you go to the grocery store and there's no broccoli, you can buy green beans. It's substitutable. You go to turn your switch on and there's no electricity, there's no substitution, and societally that's just not acceptable. So we're maintaining this incredibly large system to meet this small need. I've got enough gray hairs in this audience. How many people, just after lunch participation, raise your hand if you have air conditioning? I'm not sure if there's any, maybe one hand that's not. How many people had air conditioning when they were 10 years old? About 4 people raised. Yeah. 2 of them are under 30. So we have grown the system. So the peak load was 25,000 megawatts in the mid-90s. It's 35,000 megawatts now. We've done some incredible things in efficiency. I have Steve Keller, my staff's here today. Just check on refrigerators. Refrigerators from the 1990s use about half the electricity that they used in the 1990s. So we are really, somebody mentioned this morning, we're really making gains in energy efficiency. However, every gain we make in energy efficiency, we more than make up for with your cable box and your plasma TV and all the plug-in loads that we now have. So everything we gain by doing that, we lose with new applications of electricity. Really good stuff, but it keeps that peak load growing. So there's a couple things that this leads to. One is energy storage truly is a holy grail. If we could take all those excess power plants that are sitting idle, many of them, sometimes we're choosing between clean hydro resources and clean wind resources in the middle of the night because there's not enough load to use the power that's being run by the hydro and the wind resources. What an asset that is. Free electricity, basically, going to waste because we have no place to use it because it's 2 in the morning on a September night, nobody's using electricity. Man, if you could just store that and save it for midday the next day when electricity is tighter, that would have incredible value. But renewables come into play here too, in some good ways, in some bad ways. Renewables, a disadvantage of renewables is their intermittency. When the wind blows, the wind blows. When the sun shines. And it provides wonderful, cheap, clean, non-carbon power during those times. But can you rely on them to meet system peak? To some degree, yes. To some degree, no. I know there's a lot of good work and good studies going on to find out how we can maximize the value of those facilities during that time. But that's a place where renewables, I think, can add value in terms of trying to reduce that peak, but we need to marry it with, especially the intermittent renewables, need to marry it with other technologies in order to really make full use and reduce that peak load. We also need strategic placements of renewables as part of microgrids. I think something I know some companies are starting to get involved in is marrying, to some degree, natural gas, which we all heard about this morning, appears, at least for the midterm, to be a fairly reasonable, available resource, and renewables, so that they can work together. And the renewables run when the renewables run, and they get supplemented by natural gas to the degree that therefore you've now got a peak contribution that you can count on, one way or the other. I think it's another place where it can happen. So why not go microgrids? Why not go distributed generation? Well, let me just do the opposite side of it. One thing that we regulate in PSE is telephones, telecommunications. And here's what we were living through right now. Again, the copper network, the traditional regulated network that we all relied on up till about 15, 20 years ago. And in fact, most people didn't just have one line in their house, they might have had 2 lines in their house. If they were in a business, they had a dedicated fax line in their house. They had lines, and so the fixed costs of the infrastructure of the system were spread over literally millions of customers. What's happened is people now have alternatives. Technology's moved along. You can pull out your cell phone. These 2 people that didn't have air conditioning probably never had a landline in their life. They just have their cell phones. Us old fogies keep one landline around so we can call 911 if we fall down and hurt ourselves. So we keep losing, and Verizon was losing upwards of 30,000 lines a month over the last few years. But it doesn't decrease the fixed costs of the system. So now, and I'm always worried, there's going to be a grandmother and speculator in New York that's going to be the last customer, and her bill is going to be $2 million a year. So we're in this transition stage of moving from a regulated product with a fixed cost spread to a deregulated product. Why do I use that analogy? Well, distributed generation, smart grid, there's always been this fear. And anybody that was around, as you were in the 80s, remembers, utilities, they weren't even shy about trying to discourage distributed generation, cogeneration facilities. And the Public Service Commission was blessing them because they were worried about this. They set backup rates and interconnection charges and everything else to an obscene degree that everybody looked at and said, I can't do that, and they didn't do it. And it kind of died a quiet death for a little while. Prices came down, as Mr. Cox was talking about this morning. Everybody forgot about it, but now we're remembering it again. This time, though, I think there's much more of an appetite on the regulators' part to try to ensure, and we've got some proceedings going to really try to take a look whether the interconnection standards, 1, are reasonable, and 2, can we get them a little bit more consistent? I know for solar developers, when they're, you go to Central Hudson to get one set of standards, you go to Luncheon and get a second, you go to Niagara and get a third. That's difficult. That's a difficult way to do business. There are legitimate differences, for example, of a solar interconnection in New York City than there is in Hudson, New York. But there may not really be significant issues, why they can't be the same in Hudson, New York, as Albany, New York, as Syracuse, New York. So that's one of the things that we're going to be working on in terms of this happening. At the same time we're doing this, there's Governor Cuomo has introduced the concept of the energy highway in the State of the State last year, and we, along with many other state agencies, have been busy trying to implement this highway. And I just want to give 5 different initiatives, but then relate them back to how I think renewables, integrated renewables, is the theme of the conference. Upgrades. New York State has a long history, back to Robert Moses and the gang, of our power plants. Our cheap power is all in the north and in the west, and all of 50% of our load is Westchester County and south. That means we're in the heart of congestion lane here, as the transmission lines try to take the cheap power from the northwest, try to bring it to the south and the east. And what we've had for a long, long time are some congested lines that you just can't get as much power to the south and east as is available, just because the lines can't physically take anymore. So we're trying to take a look at some strategic upgrades to the transmission lines, using existing right-of-ways to try to increase that flow. How does that relate to renewables? Well, renewables, especially our larger, cost-effective wind facilities, unfortunately are in exactly the same place where other cheap resources are, north and west. Western New York, northern New York, Tug Hill Plateau. That's where we've got a lot of our cheap wind resources. By increasing the transmission system, that means we can increase the flow of the wind downstate, maybe get out of the situation where we're trying to pick between hydro and wind, because there will be another place to take it out of the city, down in this area, so that we can make greater use of our resources. Another initiative that we're looking at is the Indian Point Contingency Plan. This is the Public Service Commission. I'll emphasize, it's not taking a position on whether Indian Point should be closed or not, but recognizing that if Indian Point is closed, we've worked with the New York Independent System Operator and Consolidated Edison, and they've identified we have a reliability problem in the summer of 2016 if Indian Point's gone. That is not something we can wait around to find out in 2015 whether the license is going to be renewed or what the situation is at the time. We have to start planning now. So we started a process whereby the New York Power Authority, in cooperation with Con Ed, will be going out with a RFP for a variety of alternatives, what can be online by 2016 to help fill that gap and meet that reliability concern if needed. We have carved out at least 100 megawatts at a minimum for energy efficiency and distributed generation. In some ways, things like distributed generation offer greater value. This, once again, is a peak problem. Saving a kilowatt hour in the middle of the evenings, a good thing for a lot of good reasons, but it's not, doesn't help us with our reliability problem. So we're looking for some fairly targeted distributed generation programs or energy efficiency programs which can contribute on peak as an essential component of this contingency plan. We've talked about accelerating, and this just got built up after Superstorm Sandy, accelerate investment in hardening the system. What are the best investments we can make? It's obvious with all the storms coming, but we maybe have to take a little bit of a fundamental look at hardening the system. Are there places that we should strategically underground lines? Love to be able to underground lines everywhere. That would take care of the hardening problem at $1 million a mile and 25,000 miles through that. It's not easy, but strategically, there are places where we should do that. Strategically, should we be looking, again, at distributed generation as an alternative to the kind of spoken hub system that we currently have to help harden the system? Once again, I think there's a role for PG and there's a role for renewable resources as part of the hardening process. And I look towards, as we have these proceedings, the expertise of some of the people in this room helping us learn the value of and the attributes of some of these technologies, solar technologies, the anaerobic digesters, all the various renewables that are possible in New York State. We're running this one pretty directly to renewables. We're running a new main tier renewable solicitation. That is the process where we ask renewable developers to basically compete against each other. We put out a lot of money, and we try to find the best and cheapest resources. NYSERDA runs that process for us, and this is the 5th or 6th, 8th solicitation. Thank you, Jim. 8th solicitation. I will note that while New York has the most megawatts of renewable resources east of the Mississippi, we are the only state east of the Mississippi in the top 10 in renewable resources, and many of these came through this main tier solicitation. At the same time that we're doing this main tier solicitation, we're also doing a lot of customer side work. And this gets to the dichotomy that I was talking about at the beginning, spoken of, more of a distributed generation system. Our main tier really is kind of more of that. We'll take the power wherever we get it, we'll try to get it to where we need it, because that's been the cheapest resource that we've had available to us. The customer side of the tier is more targeted. We targeted it to parts of it to New York City, because geographically we were getting all of our renewables built upstate, but yet the contribution from the ratepayers that are paying for this, much of it came from downstate. So we targeted some downstate, Hudson Valley, this area, finding this to be, Hudson Valley especially, a very successful area in terms of solar photovoltaic. They keep on outstripping the funds we allocate, which is a good thing. And so NYSERDA comes back to us and say, can we expand the program further? And then finally, and this is marginally related to renewables, but we're also taking a look at expanding the availability of natural gas. Only about 50% of customers use natural gas for heating, and there are large portions of the state that don't have availability of natural gas. And I think we heard an awful lot this morning about the cost differential, this new paradigm. It used to be gas and oil were pretty much lockstep, close. Gas maybe had a slight advantage. But it didn't put you at a huge economic disadvantage if you were burning oil instead of gas, because it was, on a BTU basis, really the same thing. Saw some statistics this morning. I mean, I've heard the number 3 times cheaper on a BTU basis. I think there was some news this morning that made it sound like it may have been larger than that. Which means that if you're a community or if you're an industry that only has oil available to you, and you're competing against somebody else that builds widgets that's building it on a natural gas basis, you're at a huge cost disadvantage. And that puts that whole municipality at a cost disadvantage, because no industry, no commercial business can come to that town, because the cost of heating, cost of process is 3 to 4 times the next door area that has natural gas. So we need to take a concerted effort to try to make our rules once again a little bit more amenable to expanding natural gas to places that don't have it. It's important for the communities, it's important for their schools, their hospitals, some of the large energy users. And again, I would love to see, as this gas future seems to be unrolling itself, the marriage more between renewable developers and gas developers, because I think they could really complement each other on a reliability basis, and yet get all the attributes of renewables, the fuel diversity, the carbon-free, the environmental aspects of renewable resources. I have no idea what time it is, so once the o'clock in here, but I am happy to take some questions. I see a few. Yes, sir.
You dragged up a memory. I opened my mouth about my grandfather, but the memory is about my father, and it was specifically in September 1965. I was picking up the phone because it wasn't working. The reason it wasn't working because we had a massive knockout. And who was on the phone and actually got through was the mayor of New York City, who was going to reach my father, who retired the year before from Con Ed. Well, they sent a car for him, pick him up every day for 3 months to drag his butt back to work and figure out the best that we're in. And the question that I really have because of that memory is, have we learned the lesson? Because certainly we're in a much more stressful situation now because of outages, and there's possibly a public perception that the utility grid is stable.
Yeah, I mean, the lesson that we've learned is that you just need a ton more system awareness that certainly existed in 1965. But I was at the ISO in 2003, and New York had no clue what was happening in Ohio, none whatsoever. Ohio hardly had a clue about what was happening in Ohio. And that caused a cascading effect that blacked out again much of the Northeast. Today, guys at the New York ISO would know in a moment, hey, there's some conditions going on in the Midwest that look problematic. Let's give them a call, find out what's going on. And if need be, say, let's disconnect from them for a little while until they solve their problem. System awareness. The storms were still in the 20th century, maybe in the 19th century, the storms. To find out where the outages are in the storm, utilities get in trucks and drive around and look in windows and see if the lights are on. I mean, think about that in this day and age, where you can find out in real time, you go to a cam and find out, what the weather is in Qatar, and take a look at it. We don't know whether there's a power outage in certain places. So that situational awareness is something that utilities know they have to improve. A lot of them are putting in systems as we speak to try to improve that.
That's you. Yes.
Yeah, two questions, not really related at all. The first one about renewables. 25 years ago, Westchester County, with great celebration, opened up the resource recovery facility to burn trash and make energy. I live 10 miles from there. I know it operates, but I don't know. It's like a great secret. And how come that hasn't become the renewable source in the industry? And the other is sort of just a sidebar thing. You mentioned September 9th, quiet night, low peak demand. What's the top, when is the top peak and when is the low peak?
Okay, so I'll start with the second question first. Top peak tends to be very late in the afternoon on the hot days when you've had maybe 2 or 3 successive hot days. It can happen anywhere from June through August normally. And it's that buildup, especially in New York City, where it becomes a giant heat sink. The cement now is 103 degrees, everything's 103 degrees. And you tend to reach it at the end of the day. People are starting to turn on their air conditioners at home, they're getting home, but yet all the businesses are still operating. So it tends to be 3 to 5 in the afternoon on a really, really brutally hot week, sort of thing. Waste to energy, I mean, that has been kind of in this middle land of, is it a renewable or not? Garbage is endless. So to some degree, you could argue that it's renewable. But on the other hand, it's an incineration process. And especially in the beginning, some of the early plants had some fairly significant environmental effects. They keep on working on those technologies, I know, to gasify and to do some different things with the garbage. But generally, waste energy in most places has been, we've got actually 2 classifications in New York on whether they qualify or not. There's some places to kind of burn very, very clean waste material, wood material, things like that, that can qualify. But there's others that really don't qualify at this point because they are on the margin in terms of the
Mr. Chairman, the expectation is for Indian Point to continue to operate. They filed timely. The NRC said they've been safe for 9 years in a row. But you mentioned that you're planning for the 2016 deadline. Can you break down what the rate increase will be to ratepayers for the Indian Point contingency plan for downstate and statewide? And also, if you can just comment on what else you're doing in addition to the interconnection standardization fees to reduce electric rates statewide.
Okay, let's start with, we're in the process of finding out. The RFP was we just gave authorization for Con Ed and NIPA's issuing the RFP in consultation with Con Ed to go out and find out what is the cost of replacement. What would you have to spend to get replacement? So no answers yet, a process in place to find that out. To reduce rates, the holy grail in New York, I think anywhere where the regulator is, they want to reduce rates. We just were able to reduce rates in the Niagara Mohawk service territory at the last session. They had some surcharges come off, and we're actually able to reduce the rates in Niagara Mohawk. It's the balancing act. It's the combination of all the things. I will note that New York used to be the 2nd most expensive state I'm very proud to say we're up to number 4. But it's going in the right direction. And so it's just being wise, prudent investments, trying not to overspend, but trying to spend enough to maintain the reliability of the system. So a lot of drivers.
But there will be a fee breakdown at some point.
A fee?
Whatever the rate increase will be based on the planning costs, because they said.
Back to Indian Point again?
Yes.
No determination yet on what mechanism. You know, we've got a variety of what we call halting mechanisms in there, which means on a very regular basis, we're going to go in and say, what's the current situation look like at Indian Point? Did they get a license? Did they not get a license? What is the probability of them not being there? But it's just one of those things that we cannot take a chance that if it does close, that New York City goes dark. It's not a risk that can be taken.
We're back to the court.
Yeah, Garry, I think it's great that you're talking about and moving towards, the view that energy's doing what computers did, going from mainframes to mid-size to distributed generation systems. I mean, clearly there's that trend going on. Simultaneously on the solar field, as you know, prices have been coming down dramatically, where we were at $8 to $10 a watt a few years ago. Long Island's doing things at $4.50 a watt. Germany's down to $3 a watt. The speaker this morning did speak about how Germany's peak demand, coincident with demand, solar supplying 10 to 50% of their peak demand now, and the discussions you're having is, I think, directly right on. The thing that I'm concerned about is utilities right now still have disincentive to do solar because net metering, they lose money. And even though there's disaggregation and et cetera, the reality is what I saw in the 90s, where when utilities had an incentive to invest in demand-side management programs, those demand-side management programs went exponential because they were making money on it. How about the concept of, a standard interconnection, solar, cogen, where the utilities get a couple cents a kilowatt hour for having the power there, it's distributed, gives them an incentive to invest in it and have it go forward, and what is that, does that make sense? And if so, how do you move towards that model?
Well, it might. I mean, it costs money to pay them in order to integrate solar into their system.
I guess my perspective is that finance solar is starting to become cost effective. At these prices per watt, you take a 20-year financing deal now, you can save people money almost anywhere in the state, getting to that point where finance solar becomes cost effective retail. So switching the piece a little bit, let the retail customer who's saving money with solar, just pay a couple cents to the utility to provide the backup support power. Just sort of switch the model a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're starting by just trying to fundamentally take a look at the interconnection requirements and the necessity of what the requirements are, et cetera, and trying to stabilize, what's the word I'm looking for, equalize them amongst utilities. And then we still see that there's barriers, and I think thinking about some sort of different program might make sense.
One last question. The trees drop limbs on the power lines. The power lines are broken, but the telephone line remains because it's a steel cable. Is there any plan to come up with some kind of a rope that's insulated that would prevent that from happening to the power lines?
It's funny because people are really taking a look at, okay, trees seem to be falling on lines a lot. What should you do about that? And I've heard at least 3 different directions that people are talking about. The direction you're talking about, making the lines themselves stronger, making the poles, often it's the pole collapse, not the wire collapse, that's the problem. So making the poles stronger. And then there's the third contrarian view, you should make them weaker so that they snap, because the repair is so much easier when the poles still stand. To just run the line is a lot easier than when you have to reset the whole pole.
It takes days to reset the line. That's why I have a generator.
It takes days often because you have to reset the pole before you can reset the
Well,
lines.
I'm talking because the lines are so weak,
Yep.
they can't sustain the weight of the limb that fell on it. But the telephone runs perfectly.
Sometimes.
Well,
I've seen them all
where
come down
we are.
too. Yes.
Garry, thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.